fallout tonight from the conviction of Harvey Weinstein of 2 New York sex crimes. Bloomberg News reports that Weinstein turned to his attorney, Arthur Idella, upon conviction and said, "But I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. How can this happen in America?" Weinstein went to jail without his trademark walker, which became a symbol for those who mocked him during his trial. These images show the walker without Weinstein being removed from the courthouse. Weinstein's trip to jail was cut short when he complained of chest pains. Some reports say he had high blood pressure. Others say it was heart palpitations. Accuser and actress Rosanna Arquette trolled Weinstein on Twitter. Harvey is having chest pains going to Bellevue Hospital because, after all, this is happening in America. Another accuser, Louise Godbold, tweeted, "Chest pains? Does he even have a heart?" Weinstein defense attorney Donna Rotuno spoke with Law&Crime's Jesse Weber today at length about Weinstein's health and says his current situation is absolutely the result of his verdict.
Well, as of this morning, he was in Bellevue. Now as I was walking in, I was getting a couple of questions to see if he's been moved. We have not that confirmation yet, but if he's doing better physically, I'm sure at some point he will be moved. I mean, obviously Harvey has had health issues leading up to this, so I think it could probably be a culmination of both health issues that he was already experiencing and, of course, the shock of yesterday. We of course have known that this could have been a possibility since the day we took this case, so it wasn't as if he wasn't prepared for this possibility. I mean, the minute he was charged with the crime where he was facing life in prison, this was something that he was aware of. But in terms of the shock factor, I think just, when you live in this world of unknowns up until that point, and then when you actually hear those words, it just becomes more real.
Rotuno said jurors correctly failed to credit the testimony of actress Annabella Sciorra, who testified that Weinstein raped her after making it into her building and up to her apartment.
In terms of Annabella, I think the length of time, I do think that we made a compelling argument about the fairness aspect of that. I mean, how do you defend something from 27 years ago, or how do you disprove a negative? I think that those are two difficult things to do. And how do you do that if you don't have access to potential evidence that could disprove that? And so I think that probably played a role. I think the whole notion of how he got up to that apartment was problematic, especially for New Yorkers or someone like me who lives in Chicago in a city in a secure building, and it just doesn't happen. I don't think that the Rosie Perez testimony ended up being helpful to the government. I think it looked like overkill, and especially when I asked her on cross-examination who her friends were at the time, and she didn't mention Rosie, I think that probably raised a red flag, based on the questions that the jurors asked in the testimony they wanted read back.
A former liaison between the New York Police Department and Bellevue Hospital discussed Weinstein's likely treatment situation, which he said was certainly not special treatment.
They're taken to Bellevue Hospital. Bellevue Hospital Corrections has a dedicated floor where we hold all inmates, anybody on their way to jail or from jail. They'll be treated by trained doctors that are assigned to that unit and determined whether they're going to go right back to jail, or if they have to stay in the hospital, they'll stay in a corrections ward we have there. This would happen to anyone. The only special treatment he would receive there is we actually call any high-profile case, media case, or celebrity a special, where just people will pay extra attention and walk by the cell or the hospital room more often to check on them. If he's in a regular emergency department, yes, he will be handcuffed to a bed with a corrections officer standing with him. But most likely he'll be up in the corrections unit if it's not a serious medical problem or pressing, where it's just basically a regular hospital room. The only difference is the correction officers and gates at the exit and entrances.
President Donald Trump reacted to the Weinstein verdict while on an overseas trip to India.
Do you think justice was served in the Harvey Weinstein case?
So I was never a fan of Harvey Weinstein, as you know. In fact, he said he was going to work hard to defeat me in the election. How did that work out, by the way? I'm trying to figure that out. He was a person I didn't like, never liked. I don't know too much about the case because, as you know, I've been over here between traveling and being at meetings almost every hour of the day, every minute of the day. I haven't been able to really see too much of it. But I was just not a fan of his. I knew him a little bit, not very well. I knew him because he was in New York. Not a person that I like. I will say the people that liked him were the Democrats. Michelle Obama loved him. Hillary Clinton loved him. and he gave tremendous money to the Democrats. And I guess my question is, will the Democrats be asking for that money back? Because he gave a lot of money to the Democrats, and it's too bad, but that's the way it worked out.
What message can you as president deliver to women in America who are still afraid to come forward and share their stories of sexual harassment and assault?
Well, again, I don't know the actual results. I haven't seen too much because I've been in India, as you know.
Aside from this case, just broadly.
I think that from the standpoint of women, I think it was a great thing. It was a great victory, and sends a very strong message, very, very strong message.
The women who came forward to accuse Weinstein of sexual misconduct call themselves silence breakers. Many of them spoke out this morning in Los Angeles.
Now we know that if we dare to speak, there is a far greater chance we will be heard and our abusers will be punished. This seismic cultural change that began 2.5 years ago has been brought to a legal conclusion, to justice. Think about that. I want you to take this in. It is a historic shift that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. We're here to hold space for all women and children and men, for the brave women who have testified at this trial, who went through their own personal hell to bring us to this moment of justice.
Every victory like this is a critical step in the direction of a more just future. In a time when no less than the President of the United States is a sexual predator, and countless other predators continue to persist, yesterday's verdict was a loud and unwavering statement, a cry for accountability, plain and simple. We need to witness accountability at these highest levels to ensure that no one is above the law. We may never know how many women have been assaulted by Harvey Weinstein and other predators of his kind, but I want yesterday's verdict to be a beacon of hope for all those intent on sharing their truth, as well as those that may doubt their power to come forward.
I am one of the many women that was targeted by Harvey Weinstein and the agency that he hired, the Black Cube. And every day that went by that he was not in jail, I feared that I would once again be targeted. It's so important that women continue to come forward and break their silence so that predators like Harvey can be put away. Harvey banked on our fear. He bet on our silence, and he collected for many, many years. But today, he lost the bet, and we're the ones winning.
3 attorneys are with us tonight here on The Debrief. Julie Rendelman and Michael Bryant are with me here in New York. Stanley King is in New Jersey, joining us remotely. So, Attorney King, what did you make of that statement that Harvey Weinstein is said to have said to his attorney, Arthur Aidala, this exclamation, "I'm innocent, I'm innocent, I'm innocent"? How does this happen? How can this happen in America? What's your take on that?
It sounded to me like someone who was in shock. I mean, he knows how something like this happens in America. If he's familiar with the Innocence Project and a slew of wrongful convictions over the year, if in fact he thinks he is actually innocent, he knows that that happens. But I really think his reaction was someone who couldn't believe it would happen to him. And I think it was very personal to him, thinking that never in his life could he imagine that stature and that possibly facing a potential life sentence.
Yeah, the connection might be getting spotty a little bit there, Stanley. Sorry about that. Let's turn in-house here. Julie Rendelman, Michael Bryant with me in studio. Let's talk about this walker with Harvey Weinstein, Julie, because apparently he's being told that he can't have it in jail because he might be able to harbor a weapon in it somewhere, and therefore he the walker's gone. It got taken out of the facility, not behind bars.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to end up in some type of a museum of some sort at some point. But I don't think it's unusual that an individual can't bring their own particular walker. The normal course is that corrections will issue one from corrections that's been investigated, looked at to make sure that there's no area that has sharp objects. I don't know that there was a joke made by one of my colleagues. I don't know if it will have the tennis balls on it, but needless to say, it's not unusual, and Harvey Weinstein is not going to be treated any differently than any other prisoner.
And maybe Michael Bryant, that is what the exclamation was all about, this whole "I'm innocent, how can it happen in America?" Well, look, the bottom line here is it did happen, and a lot of people think it's a just verdict.
Well, you know what I think is interesting is I am not shocked by his reaction, Weinstein's reaction. I would have been shocked if he said anything else, because this is a guy that's been in denial for decades, thinking everything he did was perfectly fine. Why would that change? Just because a jury said he's guilty. I'm not guilty. It was okay before. It's still okay.
Yeah, I mean, didn't he make a statement going into this trial, something along the lines of that he was learning more about what consent meant? I know that a statement like that had been attributed to him at some point. I'm trying to remember way back in the back of my mind exactly when it was said and why it was said. But Michael, isn't that something you're supposed to learn long before now?
Well, you know, you can blame that on many things, his age, culture, privilege, whatever you want to choose. But the fact is, consent was always there in his mind, and it's not any different now.
And it's been judged from a more objective standard at this point, with that conviction coming down yesterday. As we predicted here on The Debrief, the widow of NBA player Kobe Bryant has filed a civil lawsuit following the chopper crash which killed her husband and her daughter. Vanessa Bryant's lawsuit, filed in state court in California, accuses helicopter company Island Express of vicarious liability. That's when a company is legally responsible for the tortious acts of its employees. Court records accuse the company's pilot of failing to monitor and assess the weather, failing to abort the flight due to clouds, and failing to safely operate the chopper. Vanessa Bryant seeks general and punitive damages, but does not demand a specific dollar amount. A Wisconsin man is on trial over charges he shot and killed his own son after a night of drinking. 44-year-old Cale Fleischhauer is being tried again for second-degree reckless homicide. His 19-year-old son, Chase, died from a gunshot wound to the head. Prosecutors say Chase had injuries from a beating, but the defense says those injuries were from wrestling. The defense is that Chase accidentally shot himself. Here now is how prosecutors began the case about the defendant's daughter, mentioning she had been bullied at school. There is, prosecutors say, a connection between the bullying and this case.
This led to an angry exchange between them all about the defendant thinking that her brother Chase should be protecting her from people, and some are saying, hey, I can take care of myself. The defendant texted to his girlfriend that he and his kids were fighting. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, she heard ruckus upstairs. Ended up causing him a bruise above his left eye. Petechiae, those are burst blood vessels in his eyes, consistent with strangulation, as is a long scratch on the side of his neck. There are bruises on his face, on his cheeks, all over his lips, scratches on his fingers, and bruises and scratches on his left arm, and blood coming out of his ear as a consequence of a fractured skull that he suffered.
And still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, we're going to head to Iowa for a verdict in the cold case murder of a teenager back in 1979. That is right after this. A verdict in the 40-year-old cold case murder we've been following on the Law&Crime network. A jury convicted Jerry Burns almost solely on DNA and a theory which linked him, prosecutors argued, to the killing of 18-year-old Michelle Martinko back in 1979 when Burns was 25. Prosecutors convinced the jury that Burns left behind DNA presumed to be blood on the gear shift of Martinko's parents' car, where her body was found in a mall parking lot where she'd been shopping. And prosecutors said the defendant left behind DNA also presumed to be blood on Martinko's dress. The defense, however, forced a state rebuttal witness to backtrack the state's theory that the DNA on the dress was specifically left by blood.
I would say it is not uncommon for a suspect in a stabbing case to actually injure or cut themselves if the victim is fighting back. And we many times will detect the suspect or assailant's DNA, say, on the handle of the weapon.
Are the situations where you also detect the suspect's DNA on other areas of the crime scene, including the area where the crime took place or the victim's clothing?
Again, that can also happen, again, if there's a struggle and there is a struggle taking place between victim and suspect. If the suspect injures themselves, there can be that transfer of suspect's DNA onto the victim's clothing or to the crime scene.
Paul, based upon the findings in this case that you familiarized yourself with in your vast experience with our crime lab, what is your opinion as the most scientifically supported theory as to how the blood of Jerry Burns ended up on this dress?
Excuse me, I object to that question. That foundation is inaccurate. There's been no testimony that the blood of Jerry Burns is found anywhere at this crime scene.
The defense continued those objections, saying that the DNA could have come from contamination, in other words, almost anywhere, and that other tests, such as blood cell counts, could have determined if the samples were indeed blood. Here is some of the defense closing argument.
There are two important things that have not been proven and cannot be proven in this case. First, we cannot conclude that Jerry Burns's blood is the source of the DNA on the dress at spot F5 or the gear shift selector, item I. We know from what we've seen time and time again that the people that we touch, the things that we touch, the things that touch us are transmitters of DNA. All the expert witnesses said they cannot determine when that DNA was arrived on the dress or on the shifter. They can't say how. In the absence of those two big things, there's been a lack and a failure of evidence produced by the prosecution.
The state says that the jury needed to deal with the hard work of investigators and look at the defendant's own words for proof of his guilt.
I want you to look at that squad car video. And when you do, you'll see an investigator who, through his efforts, finally broke the case, found the person that killed Michelle Martinko, and just finished the interview with that person where he didn't adamantly deny that he didn't do it. He only said, test the DNA, and I don't know, when asked about what happened that night. The science and the defense non-committal responses ensured that the right person was under arrest. But as you saw by Matt's questions, his inquiry changed from did you do this to why? Why did you do this? And next to him in that squad car was Jerry Burns, age 64, now an older man, not the same man he was back in 1979. He had close to a lifetime behind him. What was going through his mind? How did they get my DNA? How did they find me after all those years? Then you hear him start making outwardly making plans for his incarceration. How was he going to get his medications? How was he going to get to his appointments? Pay people, make sure his son could run the business. But the real question that he had to answer at that point in time was one that he had not had to answer for the prior 40 years.
After about 3 hours of deliberations, the jury reached this verdict.
The members of the jury, through the foreman, have signed verdict form number 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jerry Lynn Burns, guilty of the charge of murder in the first degree, dated this 24th day of February, 2020.
One of the victim's childhood friends spoke earlier today to the Law&Crime Network. He said he was surprised at how quickly it took the jury to reach that verdict, but he thought it was an easy decision.
I guess it comes down to the things that weren't, the evidence that wasn't available to the jury in this case, the things that we knew, the searches from his computer, the warrant that was taken there, that showed that this man had a history of very deviant, very sick case in pornography, strangulation, murder, rape. So we knew the jury didn't know that, but we knew that this kind of gave us an insight into probably what he was thinking in 1979. We assume it started off as a sexual attack and it went bad. He fought and he wasn't able to carry it out. So we think that's the why. We think she was a random person chosen. He was going to do this to someone that night.
Let's bring everyone back in to discuss this case. Attorney Stanley King, I'll start with you yet again here. If we look back at this, is it a conviction based solely on DNA, or was it some of the words spoken by the defendant in his interactions with police that almost seems spooky looking back, if we're to assume that he is the right guy as the jury did?
Initially, I thought it was a case that was based solely on the DNA, but now that I've seen that interview that took place in that vehicle, I didn't see that before, I think that has something to do with it. I would think that someone charged with a crime like this would, vehemently deny any involvement and so forth, and would speak with clarity and purpose of their innocence. So I do think that the jury did take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, and also that interview back in the business there, Michael Bryant, when the detectives first walked in, if you're Jerry Burns and you are indeed the killer, you've basically been prepping for that moment for some 38 years, I think it was, before they actually walked in there. He's running through in his head how he's going to react. It almost seemed rehearsed.
It wasn't appropriate, I think. I think if you didn't do it, you don't have that hanging over you like, when am I going to get caught? You're shocked. What are you talking about? 40 years ago, I don't know, was the mall even done then? I mean, I think you'd have no point of reference like he did have.
Julie Rendelman, when you look at the state's case here, was the state just spinning a theory that the defendant cut himself while slashing the victim with the knife and then saying this must have been blood? Because the defense, I thought, did an excellent job of backing the state's own experts right into the corner and saying, you can't tell for sure that this is his blood. There is blood on the gear shift, but that was the victim's blood, not the defendant's blood.
Doesn't change the fact that his DNA was found in the vehicle. So whether it was blood or not, there was still evidence that there was DNA that was in the vehicle and on the dress that shouldn't have been there. And the only reason it could have been there is because this defendant would have been with her at the time she died. Now, obviously, that in and of itself, the jury could have found him guilty, but I think the statement with it helped corroborate to allow the jury to feel comfortable with their decision.
The statement backed it up. Michael Bryant, the transfer DNA argument just completely fell flat here, but it is a little bit scary if I'm to take the defense's side, and I'm not saying that I am, that maybe there could be transfer DNA that could link somebody to a crime.
Yeah, I mean, really, that was the guts of their argument. This was so tenuous, it just wasn't going to fly here.
And ultimately, that argument did not win the day. Appreciate the insight from our panelists today. Stanley, Michael, and Julie will be back here tomorrow at 5 o'clock here on The Debrief with our recap of trials around the country. Also keeping an eye on whatever happens with Harvey Weinstein, waiting for him to ultimately head behind bars and out of the hospital.